As we know from the previous tape, which was the part 1 to this one, that we are analyzing now minor piece endgame. Minor piece endings are very different. And if you can say, well, bishop versus bishop of same color bishop, so we have this and this main rules, and bishop versus knight is going to be different ground rules. So all the endgames have only one general rule of to have an active king. But then rules, main rules, are changing. We discussed the same color bishop endings and basic rules and basic principles. I outlined them there. Then we started talking about opposite color bishops. And we said that sometimes even 2 or maybe even 3 extra pawns will not be sufficient for winning. Now, let's look at some of those positions where opposite color bishops with a couple of extra pawns are not winning. And then we will discuss some positions with bishop, minor piece endgames with bishop versus knight and knight versus knight. So we are talking only about positions with one minor piece for each side. So let's look at some positions with opposite color bishops. Well, let's put white's king on e2 and white's pawns on f2, g3, and black's bishop on e6 and white's bishop on e3. Now, what should white do here, and can white win this position? Now, the answer, well, let's make move, suppose it's black's move. King f6, you know that you can't play f4 because then it will be total blockade after bishop g4, king f5. So white has to go f3, then g4, and start moving from to put pawns on the light squares first. Black has some defensive principles here. Black can defend by playing king g6, white goes g4, and now in order to push the f pawn, white has to put king on g3. Otherwise, f pawn will never move. And this is a simple draw, because when white goes king f2, black simply plays bishop d7, and if king goes to g3, now white is ready to move f4. Black goes bishop c8, and after f4, black goes bishop d7, and you can see that this position is a draw, because white will never be able to play f5, because then black plays bishop takes f5. White will never be able to come around with the king, because of g4 pawn will be target, and white can never push g5, because that will create ultimate blockade position and will be a draw. So this position is a draw. Now, if we move whole position one square down with white's pawn on g5, f5, white king on g4, black king on g7, bishop on d8, and white bishop on e4. Now, this position, the same rule applies here. So the principal bishop here will go bishop e7, bishop d8, and black has just enough one square to hold the position and to secure a draw. This position is a draw. So this is the difficulties of winning only in opposite color bishops. You can have two connected pass pawns versus just an identical piece. and you cannot win. It can happen only in opposite color bishops. However, if we add to this position where king on g3, bishop on e3, pawns g4, f4 versus king on g6 and bishop on d7, we add here pawn on b5 for black and pawn on b4 for white. Does it change position in any way? Oh yes, it changes position a great deal. Now white wins without any problems. Now they can just march these pawns all the way to the back rank. They can simply play f5 because bishop sacrifice does not work now. White will take the bishop and win the endgame because the pawns are alive here. So that makes great difference in this endgame. So if we see this, here is one very interesting example of the position where one side has 3 extra pawns and cannot win. If white has pawns on g3, f4, king on f2, bishop on d4, and the queen side pawns on b4, c3, and black's king on g4, or black's king on f5 or g4, and bishop on c4 and pawn on b5. You see that black is blocking white pawns, every white pawn. If white goes king f3, bishop d5, check, king e3, bishop c4, white will never be able to make progress. However, white clearly has a try here. How can white try to win this position? By playing bishop e5, king g4, and now you can see that black does not want to take pawn on g3 because of f5 check. But if they don't want to take pawn on g3, maybe they shouldn't even play king g4. How can white make progress here? Okay, bishop goes to c7. Black plays bishop f1 and bishop c4. Now we go king to d4. Is there a way? Did white make any progress? Not yet. Bishop to e2. Now, it's obvious that if we can go to c5 now, that's not going to be sufficient. That it's not going to get us anywhere. So what can we do here? There is a way to try to win for white. In this position, we just make waiting move, bishop to b8. And now black has to play. Of course, black is not going to play king g4 to allow king e5, but bishop to c4. And that's where, remember I said it in beginning, so in order to win, you need 2 pass pawns, one on each side of the board. Here, white plays g4 check. King takes g4, and now king e5. But that gives us only 1 pass pawn, f pawn. Black goes bishop d3, and white makes another waiting move, bishop to a7. Now what can black do? White wants to push f5. Obviously, black's king can't move, because then we just go f5 and march all the way down. So black moves the bishop, and bishop has to move on b1 h7 diagonal, otherwise white will push f5 anyway. So, and if black plays bishop b1 somewhere, then we can go c4. And now white has very good winning chances. Probably white is already winning. B takes c, and now b5. See, we had with white 3 extra pawns, and it looked like a draw. Now we have 1 extra pawn only. We sacrificed 2 pawns, 2 extra pawns, to get what we needed. We need 2 pawns, one on each side, apart. So, and you see that if black stops b pawn, which they can, by playing bishop f5, and after b6, bishop to c8. Now, white's idea to win is, first, they must stop the c pawn. They can do bishop b8, c3, bishop d6, c4, c2, and bishop a3. And now, white simply marches the f pawn. All black can do is to play bishop b7, f5, king g5, now f6, king g6, king e6, and white wins easily. This is the power of having pass pawns on both sides of the board. This is one of the most important rules. If you want to win opposite color bishops, you have to have either two connected pass pawns that can be stopped, or having two pass pawns on opposite sides of the board. Okay, now let's discuss bishop versus knight positions, bishop versus knight endgames. They have, as any other endgames in chess, they have some specific ground rules. As always, rule number one comes, you have to have king active, but that goes without saying because it's a general rule of endgames. And now let's talk about specific rules. If you have bishop versus knight, or vice versa, knight versus bishop, so here are the rules that you want to have pawns on both sides of the board. Then bishop is a better piece. We're gonna go through certain examples. Well, let me give you one simple example. Let's get very, very basic position. White king on e1, bishop on f1, pawns on a2, b2, h2, g2. Black king on e8, knight on e7, and pawns on a7, b7, g7, h7. This position looks like completely equal, but it's not so. So pawns are on both sides of the board. And we have bishop, and your opponent has knight. White has very big advantage here. White has good winning chances. And why is it so? It's so because bishop can play on both sides of the board, and knight cannot play on both sides of the board. Knight has some other advantages, which we will discuss later, but bishop can be helping our pass pawns. When we get them, we will analyze this endgame and stop the opponent's pass pawns. Let's try to play this position out for both sides. And what we're going to do, we are not going to try to make optimally best moves. We will play the moves that will be normally expected from average to a good players. So king d2, so here applying to rule number one, activate your king. Same for black, king d7, king e3, and king d6. Now white can go king d4, but black will play knight c6 check. So how can white try to win this position? Here, white should penetrate with the king or to the one side of the board or the other. White should penetrate and let black penetrate on the other side. That's where you will see big advantage of the bishop against knight. So let's try to make some holes in black's position. White plays, suppose, bishop to d3, attacking h7 pawn, and now black has to make decision whether to play g6 and put their pawns on the color of white bishop and allow possible penetration of king on h6, or to play h6, which is more reasonable move. Suppose black plays h6. Now white has to, as you can see, white cannot penetrate to king side now, because after king f4, that's how far this king can go. There is no more entry here. And white cannot penetrate on queen side, because there is no entry on queen side. So what should white do here? To play king e4, now they are indirectly paralyzing black's knight. Suppose black goes a5. White may play a4. And now we know that black cannot play with a knight, so black has to make some other moves with some other piece. Let's see what are the other moves here. If black goes b6, we can go b3, and now we have to, now black has to do to make some major decisions. If they go g5, we go g4, and that doesn't help black because it makes king side pawns even weaker. And obviously one option for black is to king c5, and the other try to keep white's king away from penetration. So after king e6, we can play bishop c4 check, and now black can play king f6 or d6. You know, no matter what black does, white ends up penetrating with a king on one side of the board or the other. Let's see first king d6. Now you see that black's next move will be a big problem. So if white played something like g3, black is running out of moves now. Playing something like g6 is not solving their problem because we can play bishop f7, and black eventually will have to move. The pawn move's going to end, and they will have to move the king and allow king e5 penetration. So if black has to allow king e5 penetration, then maybe they are better off to go king c5 in the first place, a while ago, 3-4 moves ago. But before we do that, let's look at bishop c4 check, king f6. You may say, black is holding fortress. How can white penetrate? Really, if you look at it, there is no penetration square. But you don't have to have it right now. You have potentials of penetration, and you will do that. So the way you do that is you move the bishop. For example, bishop to b5. After king e6, you can play bishop to a6. Now, you will see that black will end up in Zugzwang. After king f7, you go king d4. Now you want to go king to c4 and b5. Can black stop this? Not really. King e6, bishop e2. Actually, maybe we should have played bishop e2 in the first place instead of bishop a6. After king e6, you will go king d4, and you will go king c4, and you will penetrate no matter what black does. And this position, and white will have good winning chances. But now, let's look at king c5 option for black. White will go king e5, and after king b4, white will go bishop c4. Now, they both sides penetrated with a king, but you will see now the great advantage of bishop versus knight. Now if black plays knight c6, now as you can tell, white is going to get king e6, f7 to get to black's pawn. So, but black has to try to do the same. Knight c6, king to e6, or king to f5, knight d4 check, king to g6, knight takes b3. And now if we go simply bishop e6, king takes, or bishop f7, king takes a4, king takes g7, you can tell that the bishop is playing on both sides. So bishop is going to be easily helping white to stop black's pawns by playing bishop e8, but after king takes h6 and g4, black's knight will have problems stopping white's pawn. But now we did not do it the perfect way for white, but I'm just showing you how basically it should be developed. So black cannot stop penetration. And now, once you know the basic rules, you have to calculate too how to get the best out of these rules. And here, after black plays king c5, white has to be very accurate. White goes king e5. Black goes king b4. And here, well, we did play bishop c4 here, protecting our b3 pawn, and black played knight c6 check, after which we gave king e6 and gave opportunity to black, or king f5, opportunity to black for knight d4 check. But now, okay, rules and principles alone are not enough. So that's where we use some calculation also. And now, by calculating, we can see what is the proper way to play for white and how does white win. Rather than play king f5 and penetrate there, we can play king d5. Now we're still going to penetrate there, but first we're going to discomfort black's knight. Black has to go knight e7 check back. Now we're going to go king e6, gaining important tempo. Black is coming back, knight c6. Now we can go king f7, but again, if we go king f7, we have to calculate the consequences of knight e5 check. Now, knight e5 check and knight takes c4. Now, do we go king f7? This is something that you should calculate on your own, and we are not going to do it together, because if I calculate with you this together, this position, it doesn't mean that next position is going to be the same. It's going to be completely different. But you know you are on the right track. And here you will see, if king f7 good, you will go there. If king f7 is not good, that means maybe you should not play in this position after king d5, knight e7. Maybe you should not have played king e6. Maybe better off king d6. But now, after knight f5 check, maybe you can go king e5. You see, the knight still is struggling to get on a queen side. And after knight e7, now rather than go king e6 and king f7 and get to this sharp position, which you can still calculate, you know eventually you will win these pawns. So, but let's push h4, because black in this position will not make any progress. On knight c6 check, we still have the same king d6 or king d5, gaining tempo, knight e7 check, king e6, and after knight c6, maybe already h5. Now you win easily. You see, we won. We gained 2 tempos, and after knight d4, king f7, knight takes b3, and bishop b5, we should not have any problems winning this position, because after we take this pawn, we moved h4, h5. That's why bishop is better than knight, because bishop can, here is the one example, bishop can stop the pawn and help our pawn. Here is the one example. Suppose black has king on b8, pawns on a7, b7, and knight on c6. We have king on g1, pawns on h2, g2, and bishop on e2. Now this position is totally lost for black. If white goes h4, black can stop this. h5, black can stop this pawn. But then we go g4, and when black starts pushing his pass pawns with a6, b5, all white has to do to somehow attack black's knight, and when knight moves, then continue pushing pawns. At the same time, if any of black's pawns becomes very dangerous, there is also one move, only one move, white needs with this bishop that just attacked your opponent's knight to stop outside pass pawns, black's pass pawn. So that's what makes bishop so much better when the fight is on both sides of the board. This is the rule number one, after the rule that you have to have active king. So you have to try to have pawns on both sides of the board. Now then, as general rule, try to not have your pawns blocked. What I mean by that is, when you push the pawns, always try to start pushing first. You push the pawn that is on the opposite color from your bishop in order not to get blocked. And the fewer pawns you have on each side of the board, you and your opponent, the better it is for bishop. And here is why. Because bishop is a long-range piece. And in order for bishop to play in a long range, it's better board and position has to be open. When it's a lot of pawns on the board, position in general cannot be, practically impossible for position to stay open. So the fewer pawns you have, the more position stays open. And that's another rule. Now, if we give all 8 pawns in beginning to each side, all 8 pawns, and bishop versus knight, I can tell you that bishop has no advantage whatsoever. There's absolutely no advantage, because knight in closed positions somewhat better than the bishop, because knight can get to the squares through the pawn structure that bishop cannot. And that's why if we take 4 central pawns off the board, this is better position for white, and white has reasonably good chances to win. And I want to repeat it over and over on every tape we do on Endgames, and on any end game we will analyze that I can give you endless examples of the rules that we apply in, but that's not our task to do. What I'm saying is that I will give you the general rules, general principles, and you combine it with your calculations, and that's what is going to improve your ending. But if you want examples, just take them from the books, take them from the games, take them from databases, and see when you get bishop endings. Now you know the old general rules. If you see that someone did not do something right, you make notes. Maybe you analyze it and check on your computer, and you will see which side where went wrong. because you know what your start point and basic points are of discussion. Now let's look at the other side of the bishop versus knight position. Let's look at the positions where knight is better than bishop. We can have two different types of positions where knight is better than the bishop. And I'm not talking about, in some position you can have black with a black and position may be open and pawns may be on both sides of the board, but if kings are equally active, normally bishop is better. But if side that has knight, its king is much more active, that makes certain differences, obviously. But we are talking about positions that kings are equally active. So now let's talk about the positions where knight is better than bishop. There are two types of positions. One is a position with a lot of pawns on the board. Okay, I'm going to give you the example. White, king on e4, and the pawns f2, g3, h4, d4, c3, b2, a2. Black has pawns on a7, b7, c6, c7, d6, f6, g7, and h6. Black's king on e7, and white has knight on e3, and black has bishop on b6. Now, what about this position? This position is bad for black. In fact, this position is very bad for black. Suppose it's black's move. White has here big positional threat. White wants to play h5. After h5, black will be completely lost, because after h5, white will have permanent square for knight on f5, and black will have permanent weakness on g7. And if black plays g6 in this position, what should white do here? Of course, white should play h5 anyway to get the f5 square. You'll see the position is not open. Bishop is not good on b6. Bishop is bad. In fact, anywhere you put the bishop, it cannot be very active. And even if you put bishop from b6 to f7, this bishop is active at the moment. It's a good diagonal. But it's not going to be active for much, much longer, because if we play d5, we can practically strangle this bishop. And after c6, we can go c4. You see, knight will get to black's position, but bishop cannot get into white's position. This is the specific case with a lot of pawns on the board. Now let's get back to the original position we started to analyze, and we say that g6 is bad because of h5. So suppose black plays h5. Now that may make difference. But then white has a couple of ways to play for win. First of all, a very good way to play knight d5 check, forcing king f7. There is no other move for black here, because anywhere else king goes, white will play knight f4, winning h pawn. After king f7, white has big advantage in pawn ending after knight b6, or they can continue playing b4 and a4, trying to squeeze this bishop out. And you see that there is no good way for white to save this bishop. If they go c6, that may make even more weaknesses. and after knight takes b6, ab, and d5, black's pawn ending is probably lost for black because white will take dc, bc, and a4. That's one of the basic principles of pawn ending. Have an outside pass pawn. We're just creating it. So but you don't have to play like this. This is one of the options that you can explore, knight d5 and knight takes b6. Also b4, a4. And bishop, you see, is not active. All I want to say that knight, you can feel the difference of the knight, knight and bishop, between knight and bishop. But now, well, okay, is that it? Is that the only position where position is closed and bishop is passive? Is that the only position where knight is better than bishop in endgame? No. Now I'm going to give you a position where endgame, where position is totally open, but knight is better than bishop. Okay, here is the position. Well, we don't know how much knight is going to be better in one position or the other. It all depends on some concrete pawn structure. Position where knight is better than bishop is when pawns are only on one side of the board. When there is no other side of the board. The other side of the board is clean. There are no pawns. Now we can tell that knight is better than bishop. Why? Because advantages that bishop has are demolished. Nothing. Because bishop is good, because it plays on both sides of the board. There are no both sides of the board, only one. But knight is better on one side of the board because knight has an access to every square of the board. And bishop has an access only to half of the squares on the board. That makes knight better piece. In this particular example, white's king on e2, knight on f3, pawns on e3, f2, g3, h4, and black's king on f7, bishop b6, pawns on h7, h5, g7, f6, e5. This is a draw. White is a little better, but to show you how simple, the simple advantage of it is this, of this position, is in order for white to make draw, white can stand on e2 with a king and just play with a knight if white wants a draw. But does it prove that we have an advantage? No, we don't have an advantage here. But in order for black to make draw, black has to play against white's potential movement of the pieces because white's king cannot be touched, cannot be driven away from e2. Black's king can be. Now this is not typical example where knight has an advantage. This knight has advantage enough, but it's a draw, just as symbolic advantage. Now let's look at the position where white has real advantage. Where white has real advantage. This is the position. This is the position. Well, white has, in this position, white has real advantage because black's bishop is bad piece. Pawns are on white, and bishop is white, and dark squares are weak. If white plays f4 and tries to penetrate from the center to the king side, black will lose the game. And if black tries to confront white's king, then we have some ways. You see, the knight can drive king away and king may penetrate. After king c5, knight d6, and white has some ways to penetrate on king side. That's why knight is better. So bishop is not a long-range piece anymore because there is no long-range diagonals. And what I want to show you also is this. Let's take some position, random position, where bishop has side that plays with bishop. White king on e2, knight on e3, and pawns on f2, g3, h2, and black has king on e7, bishop c5, pawns on e6, f7, g7, h7. This is position where black has extra pawn. This position is a draw. Because of knight and king, they can make fortress and then can set up position which will not, where black will not be able to make progress. Let's, for example, start playing with this for black. White can go f4, and black has to play bishop c5, maybe, so white moves knight to d1 or c4 somewhere, and black plays f6, maybe king f3. And now, if white stands with pawns on h3 and knight on d2, e4, I don't want to go in a very detailed analysis of this position, but I can tell you this is a draw. But now let's change this position around. Let's give white a weak extra pawn. If white has king on e2, knight on d3, and pawns on e3, f2, g2, h2, and black has king on e7, bishop on d6, and pawns on f7, g7, h7. This position, what do we say? White has an extra pawn and also better piece, because we do say that knight is better than bishop. Now this position is totally won for white. White will go h3, and with in good technical hands, and a good play for white, white will win this game. Now the reason, how white will win, they will go e4, f4, and eventually all position will move forward, and you will see that knight is a better piece. Now if you want to explore this deeper and deeper and deeper, you can play this against computer, and you can play this against yourself. Try to play it out, and you will see the advantages of knight versus bishop. And I'm telling you, this position is a winning position. We just have to remember these basic rules. So when knight is better when position is closed, which means a lot of pawns on the board, or pawns are only on one side of the board. So you have theoretical advantage. Of course, if all pawns are in practically initial positions, it's impossible to win. But if anyone has to have some kind of advantage, it will be the side that has a knight. On one side of the board, knight is better than bishop. Of course, the size of advantage depends on the pawn structure and king positions. But these are the basic rules. And now, and again, I would hate to repeat myself all the time, but you have to apply concrete position with your calculation and those basic rules. Basic rules, calculation, and correct calculation with basic moves that will make the best combination for playing correct endgame. To summarize what we did today is I can say that every endgame needs individual approach using basic certain endgame rules and calculation. Individual approach, calculation, and rules. If you do that, you will definitely improve your endgame play. And then to go to some various specific positions, one position after other. We can write books and books and books, but that's what they are based on. We can integrate, for example, pawn breakthrough, which we'll learn in pawn endings. We can integrate this with bishop endings, with bishop versus knight. All those rules can be integrated, because what I mean by that is when you have a bishop ending, you can exchange bishops and go to pawn ending where the breakthrough will be decisive. Yes, that can be done. But first, rules that we'll learn now, where your starting pawn is the basic rule. You must have active bishop. You must, in same color bishop, you must put your pawns on opposite color from your bishop. That will create more opportunities for possible integrations, and that's when you will get most out of your endgame. So you learn it, you master in your endgame, and you have plenty of opportunities to get this endgame positions what we discussed, the rules you can use from various books, databases, and all other different sources. And good luck in future endgames.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for OnlineChessLessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from OnlineChessLessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.